A janitor's hands have the power to save more than just a dirty floor. Sometimes, they can uncover secrets that have been swept under the rug for years. If you think the story of the underdog always ends with victory, you're in for a surprise. If you're here because you believe that those with nothing can still change the world, then stick around. This story is just beginning. But if you doubt that someone with a mop and a bucket can ever make a difference, then it's time to leave, because you're about to hear the tale of a man who was dismissed for his humility and mocked for his status, yet still managed to make history. Like, subscribe, and follow if you believe that sometimes it's the most unassuming people who hold the power to unravel everything. Ethan Reed didn't like being a janitor. No one liked it. But when you have nothing left, when your daughter's future hinges on every breath you take, you put pride aside and scrub floors for a living. His life had shrunk into small, manageable tasks, the most personal one being keeping his 7-year-old daughter, Grace, alive. Alive in the sense that she still had hope, that she still woke up every morning with a smile, and that she still believed in her dad. For the last 3 years, Ethan had been battling against both fate and the unpaid medical bills that came after Grace's battle with leukemia, an illness that had taken everything from him. His house, gone. His savings, gone. His dignity, just about gone. But he kept fighting, because if there was one thing Ethan believed in, it was that you never, ever quit when it comes to your child. That's how he found himself in the Whitmore building at 7 a.m., the floors gleaming like a polished marble sea, his only company the echo of his mop scraping against the ground. The building itself, a towering masterpiece of glass and steel, had been built to impress. People like Margaret Whitmore, the company's CEO, loved things like that. She'd built an empire on the backs of people just like Ethan, the ones who didn't have the luxury of taking a day off, the ones who went unnoticed. He could feel her disdain in the air every time she passed him, like a sharp knife cutting through the murky office atmosphere. Margaret's perfectly manicured fingers never so much as brushed against the surface of the floor she commanded. And if her sharp gaze, often thrown his way, was any indication, she thought very little of the man with the mop. But none of that mattered to Ethan. He had his reasons for being here, reasons that had nothing to do with her disdain. But as she breezed past him one morning, barely acknowledging his existence, her words slipped through the air like venom. "I can't believe they'd hire someone like him. A janitor, for the Whitmore building," Margaret sneered as she spoke to a group of well-dressed executives in the hallway. "What a waste of space. Honestly, it's beneath me to even look at him." Ethan's jaw clenched as he continued his work, pretending not to hear her. But her words stung like 1,000 paper cuts, each syllable digging deeper into the wounds of his pride. He didn't know why he let it affect him, but in that moment, as she strutted away in her heels, he felt something inside him snap. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a man who had fallen into the gutter of society. No, he was someone who, despite being knocked down, still had the strength to get up and fight for the one thing that mattered more than anything in this world: Grace. As the days passed, Ethan's routine stayed the same. He scrubbed and mopped the floors, wiped down the polished glass of the office windows, and threw away the trash that the executives created. But each day, he found more of his mind wandering, not to the dirt beneath his feet, but to the whispered conversations he overheard as he worked. The things the employees of Whitmore said when they thought no one was listening. The secrets they shared, hiding behind conference room doors, thinking the janitor's presence was insignificant. They didn't know he was listening. One afternoon, Ethan overheard something that piqued his curiosity. Two employees, speaking in hushed tones near the elevator, talked about an upcoming project. But it wasn't the project that interested Ethan. No, it was something far more disturbing. The mention of a shady deal that involved the demolition of several properties in a rundown neighborhood. Properties that were home to families, children, elderly residents, people who had nowhere else to go. It was the kind of deal that people like Margaret Whitmore didn't care about. The kind of deal that had no face, no identity, no voice. But to Ethan, it was a slap in the face, a direct attack on the people who mattered most to him. The words rang in his head long after they had been spoken, echoing like a bombshell. Demolition? Displacement? The idea of innocent people being thrown out of their homes didn't sit well with him. But there was more. He realized something. The project was tied to a massive real estate venture, one that would put millions of dollars in the Whitmore Company's pockets, while at the same time crushing entire communities under the weight of their ambition. The whole thing felt wrong, but Ethan knew better than to get involved in things beyond his pay grade. He could barely afford to feed his daughter, let alone take on a corporate giant. But he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was bigger than him, that this was something he could change if he tried. Margaret's mocking words still echoed in his ears, but now they became a catalyst, a driving force that pushed him toward action. No longer would he be just the janitor. He was going to dig deeper, expose the truth, and fight for those who had no one to stand for them. If they thought he was beneath them, they hadn't seen anything yet. In the silence of the building, as Ethan continued his work, the weight of what he had overheard pressed against his chest. His job had started as a way to make ends meet, but now it was about something much more significant. He had a choice: stay silent and let the world pass him by, or speak up and risk everything, just to make sure that a few good people didn't get trampled by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Days passed, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something monumental. The words he had overheard, the whispers about demolition and displacement, clung to him like a weight, heavier with each passing moment. He wasn't the type of man to get involved in corporate battles or legal wrangling. His life had been reduced to smaller, simpler things: bills, groceries, doctor's appointments for Grace, and getting through another day. But now, there was something more at stake. What he had heard wasn't just about money. It was about people's lives, the same lives that had been taken for granted by people like Margaret Whitmore. And somehow, in that moment, it was impossible for Ethan to stay silent. He began to notice the cracks in the system, the things that others ignored, dismissed, or thought were too small to matter. Margaret Whitmore had built her empire by bulldozing over those cracks, creating a polished facade of success. But beneath the surface, Ethan could see the corruption, the greed, the exploitation of the very people who kept the world running. The janitors, the workers, the low-level employees who were nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Ethan wasn't sure how he could take on such a massive structure, but he had one thing Margaret and the others didn't: a sense of empathy. And in this world, where people seemed to have forgotten the importance of human connection, empathy was power. It started small. Ethan began paying closer attention to the conversations in the hallways, picking up on the subtle hints and half-spoken words that painted a much bigger picture. There were more whispers about the project, the demolition plan that had somehow snuck under the radar, buried deep in the company's agenda. He discovered that the properties being targeted for demolition weren't just abandoned buildings. They were the homes of real families, many of whom had lived there for generations. People who had nowhere else to go, no one to fight for them. Ethan had seen this kind of thing before: the ugly underbelly of corporate expansion, where profit was the only thing that mattered and people were disposable. He started to take notes, scribbling down details when no one was looking, piecing together a plan to expose what was really happening. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a journalist, but he was a man who understood what it meant to struggle, to fight for what little you had. And when he thought about the people who would lose everything, the families who would be thrown out without a second thought, something inside him hardened. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. The more Ethan uncovered, the more determined he became. He learned that the demolition wasn't just about getting rid of old buildings. It was part of a larger scheme to make way for a new luxury development project, a high-end condo complex that would sell for millions of dollars. The irony of it wasn't lost on him. Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had ridiculed him for his lowly status, was building her empire on the backs of people like the elderly woman who lived on the block, Mrs. Rodriguez. Ethan had been to her house countless times, helping her carry groceries or fix leaky faucets. She was kind, sweet, and had nowhere else to go. Her home meant everything to her, yet it was now marked for destruction. It wasn't just the elderly who were at risk. Ethan found out that the project would displace dozens of working-class families, most of them single mothers, young children, and hardworking fathers who barely scraped by as it was. Families like his own. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. It was a race against time. If this project went forward, these people would lose their homes, their stability, and for some, the very foundation of their lives. Ethan couldn't let that happen. But how could a janitor stand up to a powerful CEO like Margaret Whitmore? How could someone like him, a man with nothing, who cleaned floors and emptied trash, possibly make a difference. But as he worked, day after day, he began to see something in the people around him. They weren't just employees. They were human beings, many of them stuck in the same grind he was. They weren't cogs in a machine. They had dreams, aspirations, families they loved, and homes they wanted to keep. Even some of the executives, people who made decisions behind closed doors, had started to question the ethics of the project. Ethan overheard them speaking more openly about their discomfort with the plan. And while none of them seemed willing to act, they were all waiting for someone to take the first step. Ethan's step came one evening, when he stumbled across a stack of confidential documents in a janitor's closet, hidden away beneath a pile of unused cleaning supplies. It was as if the universe was pushing him forward. Among the papers were detailed blueprints of the luxury condo project, including contracts, legal documents, and the list of properties marked for demolition. He didn't hesitate. With a quick glance around to make sure no one was watching, Ethan stuffed the papers into his jacket and left the building. It was a gamble, but it was the only way he could get the information he needed to fight back. Over the next few days, Ethan carefully reviewed the documents at home, making copies of the most incriminating material. As he sat at his kitchen table, the weight of what he was about to do pressed on him. He had no idea what kind of repercussions he would face for exposing the truth, but it didn't matter. Every time he thought of Grace, of the family he was trying to protect, he knew he had to act. This wasn't just about a corporate conspiracy. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of father Grace deserved. Ethan knew what he had to do. He couldn't do it alone. He needed to reach out to the people who had a voice, who could take this information and make it public. He contacted a local reporter, someone he knew from the community who had always had an eye for a good story. They met in secret, Ethan passing the reporter the files, explaining what he had uncovered and what was at stake. But as he did, Ethan realized something else. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just the man who cleaned floors and swept up dust. He was a whistleblower now. He was the one standing between the people who would be destroyed and the people who had the power to stop it. And when Margaret Whitmore's empire came crashing down, it wouldn't be because of her high-powered lawyers or her million-dollar investments. It would be because a man who had nothing left was willing to risk everything to protect those who had no one else to fight for them. Ethan's heart raced as the whistleblower report hit the news. His carefully guarded secret was out, and the Whitmore Corporation was under fire. Margaret Whitmore had tried to bury the truth, using her power to push back against the media storm, but the momentum was too strong. The people Ethan had fought for, people like Mrs. Rodriguez, were finally being heard. The media, backed by public outrage, demanded answers, and soon, city officials were stepping in. Margaret's pristine facade cracked, revealing the corruption underneath. In a high-stakes board meeting, with legal teams scrambling and her empire crumbling, Margaret finally faced Ethan again. This time, he wasn't just the janitor. He was a symbol of what she had overlooked, the power of people who were dismissed and forgotten. With his evidence in hand, Ethan made one last appeal: halt the demolition, rework the project, and save the families. The room fell silent as Margaret, once so confident, recognized the gravity of her actions. She knew she couldn't ignore this anymore. With a reluctant nod, she agreed to pause the demolition and reassess the development plan, ensuring that the community would be preserved. Ethan didn't walk away with riches or accolades, but the faces of the people he saved were enough. Grace hugged him tight that evening, and for the first time in years, Ethan could breathe easy, knowing he had done something that mattered. He had saved not only the families, but also his own dignity. Sometimes, standing up for what's right didn't require wealth or power. It just took the courage to speak when others wouldn't listen.